We have led a journey here, haven't we? We've gone from being to life to consciousness. Think about that. Being, life to consciousness. And we've tried to identify three essential processes: complexification, differentiation, and semi-permeability, which allow being to become life, life to become consciousness. And yet, at every level, we're still trying to understand. In the Code Breaker by about Doda, who came up with the CRISPR gene, they say, here are the big questions. How the universe began? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is the universe deterministic? Is there free will? How did life begin? And what is consciousness? In our journey, consciousness, that's where you and I are, that self-awareness where we experience and can vision the past and the future. Consciousness, one of the big mysteries of who we are and how this phenomenon of self-awareness occurs. Now, for millennial, the subject of consciousness was the purview of philosophers. And only in the last 100 years, and even maybe in the last 70, has the subject been taken up by scientists, neurologists, and cognitive psychology. And today we can only touch on this mystery. I'm serious, this has been going on for millennials. So today I want to touch on just the conversation of the mystery of consciousness that's been going on. Now there's a guy named Koch, and C-O-C-H, and in 1998 he made a bet with another guy named Chalmers. Now, Koch has this view of the brain and consciousness that it's about these neural network correlations or patterns at a 40 hertz level. And so we're going to call that the 40 hertz model. In other words, your brain is ticking 40 times a second in these patterns, and that is what consciousness is. That gives rise to your thoughts and feelings. And another guy named Chalmers, he came up basically saying it's about information. It's a hard problem, and it's an information problem. And any system that's changing information within itself is conscious to some degree. Now, in 1998, these two guys at a conference on consciousness made a bet on stage for a case of wine. And Koch bet Chalmers that within 25 years there would be a clear neural pattern underlying consciousness, and we would identify it. So this whole concept is important. Now, on the Chalmers side, what arises is what's called an integrated underlying information system, or an integrated information system, IIT, that it really is. And as one person said, consciousness arises in any system where components swap information in certain mathematically defined ways. Isn't that great? Is it getting any clearer to you? This whole concept of brain and how it works, they ended up presenting both of these at a conference. And at that conference, everybody was real nice with them. Koch spelled out the theory's startling implications. A single proton, he says, which consists of three interacting quarks, might possess a glimmer of consciousness, he conjectured. And this gives rise to a whole understanding called panpsychism, which basically is the old shaman's view that consciousness pervades everything. Now, at that conference, everybody was very gentle until this quantum computing guy named Scott Aronson spoke up and eviscerated it, basically saying, if what you're saying is true, then a compact disc running error correction codes can be far more conscious than a human being. Well, needless to say, the whole concept of consciousness became muddier and muddier. Now, Koch has even proposed building what he called a consciousness meter, which would measure consciousness in any object the way a thermometer measures temperature. Totally absurd in my mind. But what happened was these two guys and the other people doing brain research and working on consciousness, trying to solve this conundrum, they went to optogenetics. They went to functional magnetic resonance imaging. And our listeners, you want to see something cool, go to some of those, functional, they're called fMRIs. Also transcranial magnetic stimulation, and even planting electrodes right inside the brain. Modeling all this data and giving it more power by feeding it through these algorithms that AI augments. And then, in 2023, I should say in 2022, the 26th annual conference of the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness happened. And the diversity of perspectives was dizzying. The old 40 hertz oscillation hypothesis of Koch yielded to a swirl of fancier neural correlate models. In other words, people built on it. And they started looking at the consciousness of primates and spiders and plants, the ontological status of virtual reality and dreams, and the implications of dementia and pathological states. And I'm reading from American Scientific here. But what was conspicuously absent was quantum mechanics. And for those of you who have kept up, at least with John Wheeler's work or Roger Penrose, both of them have linked consciousness to quantum physics and quantum mechanics. And Chalmers has actually begun toying with a model that fuses his integrated information theory with quantum mechanics. So, quantum mechanics, when someone asked Chalmers why was it omitted from this conference, he said it was too fringy. So quantum theories were beyond the pale, and we're left to explaining consciousness by relativity over and over. And what about the talks on mystical experience induced by meditation, DMT and LSD? What about artificial intelligence and chat, GPT, that is now, does it have a moral sense? Over and over we see a new... It's amazing to me because all these, in the time I'm speaking, new models are emerging. The integrated information theory has a new rival model called the global workspace theory, in which consciousness serves as the brain's way of spotlighting critical information. In other words, it's a discernment process. But through all of this and through the conference, their conclusion was easy. Are you ready to hear the mystery solved? Well, don't hold your breath. The results of the tests were totally inconclusive. The brain, as one person said, the brain is so hideously complex and that consciousness is so poorly defined that multiple speakers acknowledge there's no way to the end of it. All of this is to say that consciousness research, far from converging on any unifying paradigm, has become more fractious, more chaotic than ever. So, Koch and Chalmers, they meet on stage. And Koch agreed that he lost merely because he put the word clear in there. In other words, consciousness must be clear. And so he realized it was doomed. So he gave it up. And Chalmers said, very cool, Koch left the stage. And he came back with a case of wine. And then they did it again. Koch doubled down on his bet, and he said, 25 years from now, he will be 91, Chalmers will be 82, and consciousness researchers will achieve, and he used the word clarity that now eludes them. And so Chalmers and Koch shook hands. And as Chalmers said, I hope I lose, but I'll suspect I win. I suspect so too. I bet consciousness will even be more baffling in 2048 than it is today. great conclusion to a conference. And in my mind, this week I hope to have some glimmer of a toehold for an understanding of what consciousness is. And what I get is nothing more than what I believed all along. Consciousness is an island in a sea of being and a house of mirrors. And yet here I am hearing, seeing, thinking, talking. I can feel my feet. I can feel my hands. It's just an amazing thing what this self-awareness is. And yet, the human family is still deep, deep in the dark as to what's really going on here. So, given the mystery of it, I think we could say anything we want and we would be able to have free reign. So, Bob, I'll start with you. What say you on this mystery of consciousness?
Well, nobody at that conference asked me, so I would have told them what it was all about. Just asked. No, seriously, I entered the field of psychology and the field of sociology because I wanted to know what consciousness was. I wanted to know what I was doing in this strange environment I found myself, and why was I here, and what could I do about it? Well, after all those years of study, I don't know what consciousness is. I know I've got some piece of it. I'm aware that I am conscious of things. Now, when you start talking about consciousness in flowers and consciousness in apes and whatever, I think we can distinguish between self-awareness and consciousness because, a plant is some degree conscious when it moves away or toward the light. And a planaria is some degree conscious when it moves towards or away from light or any other stimulus. So we react to things, and that is some degree of consciousness. But when we start talking about self-awareness, that's a little bit different because we're able to track our awareness over time. And that's a very powerful and dangerous thing because it leads to all sorts of weird questions within ourselves and with our interaction with others. So, yeah, consciousness, the only thing, after all of these years of study, the only thing that I can say is I know that I have some degree of consciousness and some degree of self-awareness, but I have no idea what your degree of consciousness and your degree of self-awareness or Marianne's degree of consciousness and Marianne's degree of self-awareness because they're totally unique. It's our self-awareness is based upon our unique place in the universe. And I don't think that we're going to be able, I don't care if it's 25 or 2,500 years, to be able to paint a general picture of consciousness because every single person with a paintbrush in their hand has a different type of consciousness.
Well, so that gets back to the solipsism problem. And, I can only know what's in me. I can't know anything in you. And again, Husserl, I think, came up with intersubjectivity, which kind of solves some of that. Marianne, what say you?
Well, I say I'm glad Bob went first. Because it is, if consciousness is, I agree. I don't think it's a universal definition that we're going to be able to find, and that we do all have a piece of it. We're just part of this greater thing, and nobody really understands or knows what that greater picture is. If there is even one. I mean, it might, we might just be trying to create one right now, right? All of these individual consciousnesses are working to come together to unify. And maybe that's what the whole goal is to unify, rather than having a unified consciousness that has split off. Maybe we are just, it's kind of, I think it was it Aquinas who talked about the soul was actually grown, we are grown from the organic and to the next, Honestly, who knows? All I know is that we have to somehow navigate the world that we live in with a bunch of other consciousnesses, right? A bunch of other ideas and viewpoints, and how do we best do that? To me, that's the question we should be asking.
Yeah, if I could just jump in for a second.
Yeah.
As we've discussed in a couple of previous episodes, we can't have our own self-awareness without interaction with others. That is part of how we get to become self-aware, is that we interact with other consciousnesses. So I 100% support what Marianne's just saying.
Yeah.
And you know, part of the experience, the phenomenon of experience, is that it does feel like a house of mirrors, a very tricky place. I think about consciousness not wanting to die. And so we come up with these different models. Are they true or not? I don't know. Is consciousness, is there a meta connection that you all have implied where consciousness, and you know, my view of consciousness is it's not just in my head, it's also what dances between us. And what Marianne was implying, the bigger picture, you know, the image I got was sparks trying to get to the fire, you know, find the source of it. That consciousness is an experience that we have to realize is a tricky place, and we can fool ourselves very easily. One of the models of consciousness that I've often drawn from is that mind itself is an amplifier. We grow this amplifier so that it can begin engaging in that meta connection, if you will. And is that what it is? I can't really say, nobody can, but I think the mystery of self-awareness and of consciousness, and I mean, you know, according to some of these models, a thermostat has consciousness. So it's important to see, you know, Bob, you made the distinction about self-awareness and consciousness. There's a point where consciousness built up to become self-aware. And that's the place that the mystery, you know, hits the fan, if you will, because we're trying to find the source of our own way of being, our own understanding of being in the world. And that, you know, Da Vinci said it. He was looking for the final proportion. And I think we're all looking for that. How do I fit? What is it I'm fitting in? What is it I should not allow inside me? What is it I should allow inside me? What constitutes health? What is wholeness? These things all are banging at the doorway of consciousness. And consciousness is looking back at itself, trying to look at questions. I think of the search for the CRISPR gene that allowed us to have all these very quickly made vaccines. We are finally beginning to resolve some of the mysteries of bio and biochemistry and microbiology. We're starting to see. Now, can we say why? No. That's deep end stuff. But we try. I think we do try. And it looks to me like consciousness does have an intent. And Marianne, I think you touched on it. It's about hooking us up. Bob, you also touched on this. And it's about creating a larger consciousness. You know, we've called it the Gaia hypothesis. We've called it the global brain. There's something fundamental to being, life, and consciousness that human beings seem to have misplaced that connection. And many of the things that were made to help us connect no longer do that. What was it Jung said? Religion is the greatest force against religious experience. We have blocked ourselves, and that's why I keep going back to a house of mirrors and tricky, that consciousness, self-awareness, we all want to be the hero. We all are creating a personal narrative that justifies our own sense of being. And we have to see beyond those projections a little bit, at least, I think, to address the mystery of consciousness head on, which is a mystery, and I'm thankful people are spending their lives trying to solve it, but good luck, brothers and sisters.
Let me tweak a couple mirrors in this house of mirrors. The interesting thing about human consciousness is that we share it through our artifacts. I can go and read what Jung thought about consciousness, and he's been dead for 40 years. But I can still tap into his consciousness and his thoughts, and those thoughts can influence my consciousness. And me talking about that and you listening to it influences your consciousness. So it gets back to this interaction. And I think that, the Gaia hypothesis is a very interesting one. I think it's oversimplified, but if we can kind of look at each individual as like a node within a larger, you want to call it a global brain, you want to call it global consciousness, whatever. But just as there are millions of neurons in our brain, there are millions of consciousnesses, billions of consciousnesses on the planet. And they're all interacting with each other to some degree and changing each other to some degree. So consciousness is a constantly changing event that we are lucky sometimes to tap into and catch a little glimpse of what's going on. But most of the time, this event is just so much bigger than each individual that it's almost impossible to conceive of it.
And you just laid out, I'll turn it over to you in a second, Marianne, but you just laid out part of the larger meta consciousness. Once the written word happened, once we have books, once we have libraries, once we have records, now computers and all ways of storing information, we begin to have what I would call an archive of consciousness. I think that's part of what the Foundation Trilogy is about myself, but is to see this archive as a living reality that is still interacting with us. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and I think it is an ongoing process. It's continuous, and for us to be able to see outside of our own specific bubble is that where that connection comes in. But I always kind of go back to, why does this exist at all? Why anything? But I think you talked about earlier too about the intelligences. Is consciousness trying to learn something? There was a movie a few years back, Lucy. I don't know if you saw that, but where they kind of explored the idea that the point is to learn, to know more, and for our brain to be able to access all of this information, it has to evolve. And so we're evolving. Our brains are changing. Technology is changing our brains. I mean, look at these little kids now. Their thinking is quite different than ours was. And I think that's going to continue. And so consciousness is this ever evolving. Is there an end? I don't know. And why does it exist at all? That hurts my brain to try and think about that.
Yeah, I hear that. And, my opening ramble was a ramble. I have to admit, there was so much, and these conferences were so enlightening as to how chaotic and confusing the research is because of all the different points of view that are addressing it. And one of the things that stuck out was we might be asking the wrong questions. And consciousness is tricky enough to keep itself maybe from asking the right questions, whatever that is. And I don't know that to be true, but sometimes it feels that to be true. And on that statement, having burnt up a bit of this time with my opening babble, trying to make sense of the mystery, final comments, Marianne?
Well, I think it's a mystery, and I think we just have to do our best to be aware of how we interact with the world and how that is influencing us, and always questioning what it is that we are seeing, feeling, hearing, and trying to make some kind of sense. And I also think there's a determination here too, that as individuals we have to make choices and decisions continually and constantly, and every single one of those choices and determinations is going to lead us to that next place. And they're all it's important, it's powerful, and I really believe that we are creating the world we're living in. And the more consciously aware we can be of what we're doing, how we're thinking, the closer we can get to this place of connection, or wherever it is we're going. I don't know.
Amen, though. Bob?
Yeah.
Well, I agree. This mystery is probably not something we're going to get a handle on anytime soon. But we are able to perceive a lot of things about our existence while we're in this search for what consciousness is. And we have been able to find that there are certain ways to behave that are healthier than others. And there are certain ways to interact with each other that are healthier than others. And it's up to us, as Marianne says, we've got the choice. We need to be able to focus our consciousness on those things that improve the life of ourselves and those around us. And that may be the goal of consciousness, not necessarily to understand what it is, but to use it as a tool to make our lives better. And it's tragic if we don't use that tool when it's available to us.
Amen. Boy, is that the truth. And picking up on that, it seems to me that there is a role, and that what's happening is consciousness is seeking to organize itself into a larger life, a global family. I still believe that. I truly do. And we never really brought artificial intelligence into this, which is going to inform the whole consciousness issue at levels that we can't even imagine right now. We're just now starting to see some of the great results and the impediment that AI can cause us, and we're a little bit afraid, and we ought to be. But we live in a rational universe, at least most of us do. But what I've learned is even in a rational universe, there is plenty of room for incomprehensible wonder. And that's part of what this podcast is about, just lifting it up. We're not here to argue with you. We're not here to present a point of view that's contrary to yours that you can take issue with. We're just presenting some points of view. Next week, we're going to give you a point of view and talk about the difference between forever and eternity. What does that mean? I don't think they're the same. Not at all. I think every moment's eternal, but it's not going to last forever. My friends, blessings, and may the power of the One speak up through your very, very lips.